hopefully the sound quality should be improved. I'm now using a lavalier plugged into a USB sound card. It's pretty cool. So I'm looking at one of my favourite heavyweights, Lennox Lewis. So Lennox Lewis is a British Canadian heavyweight, became undisputed champion, all the rest. So let's get into it. Tyrell Biggs. This was in the amateurs, by the way. I'm going to go over his amateur career. He fought Tyrell Biggs. You know Tyrell Biggs fought Riddick Bowe, fought Mike Tyson, fought all these guys. Supposed to be going on to do things in the professional ranks. So he beat Lennox Lewis in amateur on points. And this was maybe for the first, I want to say, Canadian Olympic trials. So it won't actually show what it is, but we see Meldrick Taylor's actually on there. Mark Breland, fantastic amateur, 27-0 at the time. So I think that was a qualifier, or it may have been the Olympics itself. So I'm not really too familiar with a lot of them amateurs. Some will probably know some of them. There's some Canadians there. Lewis obviously hosted for Canada in the Olympics. I saw this fight here against James Oyebola. I think he's Ghanaian or Ugandan. This was in Edinburgh, and it was a referee's stop contest, I think. I remember in the last I said I'm not sure what that meant, but I think that's what it was. So this was a British guy, and Lewis knocked him out. I remember the fight. Yeah, I remember being quite shocked actually, because he hit him clean on the chin and he went. And obviously in amateurs it's less common for someone just to get knocked out clean. So he had another fight in Edinburgh just 2 days later, and then he had fights in Stockholm, Sweden. I don't know these names. A lot will know Jorge Luis Gonzalez. Jorge Luis Gonzalez beat Lennox Lewis in the amateur ranks. He beat Riddick Bowe in the amateur ranks. He fought Riddick Bowe as a professional, and it turned out to be one of Riddick Bowe's highlight career knockouts. Jorge Luis Gonzalez is a Cuban heavyweight, 6'7", done fantastic in amateurs. Didn't quite pull the trigger at pro games. Similar to like an Aldi Harrison. Aldi Harrison was a fantastic amateur, one of the very few British super middleweights to super heavyweights to medal at the Olympics. And so this guy beat Lewis in the amateurs. Oh, so he had a rematch just 6 days later and beat him by a split decision. So Lewis lost to this man, and I didn't actually see that. I think I seen a Nathaniel Fitch. I think I remember seeing that, yeah. And I'm not a big into watching amateurs coming up, and obviously I wasn't about it at the time, but you know, I'm not big into watching amateur fights, even the Olympics. I'm more of a professional kind of guy. I like the style better. So obviously we'll know about Riddick Bowe. So this was the Olympics, 1988 Olympics, that Roy Jones Jr. and many others competed in. Riddick Bowe was the USA super heavyweight. So he fought the Canadian super heavyweight, and that was for the gold medal. And it was a stoppage. So they said, we'll get the rematch in the professional games. So Lewis turned pro then. So let me just get his professional record up. Now I can go on for quite some times because I'm quite extensive as far as Lennox's career. So he fought Al Malcolm in his first fight. It was a pretty easy knockover job. I haven't saw all of these, but I saw some of them. I saw, for example, the No Quarles. No Quarles is a journeyman. Give it a go. No Quarles fought guys like John L. Gardner as well. I think he actually beat John L. Gardner. John L. Gardner had a comeback later on, and No Quarles beat him. A journeyman, I think, from Birmingham, England. So none of these look familiar to me. I've probably seen him. Okay, I've seen that. Jean-Marc Chenet. John Maurice Chenet. That was at Crystal Palace. So, what was this? His 14th, 15th fight? Gary Mason. Cool. An interesting story about Gary Mason. I lived in the district of South London that Gary Mason actually was living in when at the time of his unfortunate and untimed death. And yeah, I knew one or two people who knew Gary Mason, so, and they say nothing but good things about him. But Gary Mason, look, 35-0. Gary Mason had beaten, I believe, Razor Ruddock at the time. That was a real risk for Lennox to go in there against the Gary Mason. But he passed the test. He stopped Gary Mason, I think, the 7th round. And that's a 4-star contest in my opinion. Gary Mason, he was doing bits, good knockouts, good friend and sparring partner of Frank Bruno. And this probably didn't help Frank Bruno, because Frank Bruno was friends with Gary Mason, and then, he became a rival of Lennox Lewis. So he beat Gary Mason, which was his first challenge. And then Mike Weaver had already been beaten quite a few times by the looks of it. He had lost to Larry Holmes, he had lost to some other guys by that time, so he was really on his way out. He lost to Larry Holmes again in 2001 or something, when Larry Holmes was over 50. Just interesting trivia. Okay, Glenn Mccrory, nearly a foregone conclusion. Glenn Mccrory, former IBF cruiserweight champion from the northeast of England. Seen better days. It was, I suppose, just to have that name. And here we go again with Tyrell Biggs. So after only facing him a few years prior, he faces Tyrell Biggs again. Tyrell Biggs fought a overweight journeyman fringe contender David Bay and had a lot of trouble getting rid of him. And Tyrell Biggs at that time was 15-0 or 14-0. So whoever was managing Tyrell Biggs at the time, I'm not sure if it was the same handlers as Mike Tyson, but he was 15-0, 14-0, and this Olympic gold medalist, they put him in with a 30-0 Mike Tyson for his first career defeat, and I believe I'm not sure who he fought. He might have fought Riddick Bowe this time as well and had a defeat to him. So he fought Lennox on the undercard of Evander Holyfield versus Burt Cooper. And Evander Holyfield wasn't supposed to fight Burt Cooper on the main event, but Evander Holyfield fights Burt Cooper. Has a tough fight, but on the undercard, Lennox Lewis has a good knockout of Biggs. So, yeah, Biggs has a few losses, but it's not exactly a journeyman either, especially at this time. So, that's another scalp, I suppose. Levi Billups, that was actually turned out to be tough for Lewis, and he was getting undue criticism, and it went the distance as we saw. But that was a tough fight for him. And the Derrick Williams now. Derrick Williams from the UK. Derrick Williams was trying to be slippery, and he held a lot. held a fair amount. He tried to do bits here and here against Lennox, but ultimately he was too negative and Lewis blew him out of there. And Lewis was really doing some good work here with Brits like Gary Mason and Derrick Williams. So Derrick Williams I wouldn't rate like a Gary Mason or maybe even a Tyrell Biggs, but Derrick Williams, yeah, British level. Mike Dixon, I think I've saw that one. Now this was incredible. Now anyone who knows Donovan Razor Ruddock, he was a Canadian heavyweight. Not sure if he's Canadian with Caribbean heritage, but he's Canadian, born and raised. Very good pro, very good amateur as well. And he'd been beaten actually by Gary Mason, and he had 2 tough back-to-back fights with Mike Tyson. They had the controversial stoppage in the first fight, and then he lost on points in the second fight. This I believe was not too long after that, so I think the Ruddock rematch was in late 91, so or early 92. So Lennox wipes the floor with him. 2 rounds, catches him by surprise, knocks him spark out. Fantastic performance. Very explosive. This is athletic prime Lennox Lewis with the flat top. And he done a great job. And this is why Lewis impressed me. These were guys that weren't no slouches, and he just goes in there and just makes it look like a bulldozing. Tony Tucker, that was a pretty good performance. Lewis was using his jab well and had the hand speed. Only he lost to Mike Tyson, as we saw there, 1 loss. He was getting on an age. He was about 36 maybe at the time. Again, a tough guy. Mike Tyson couldn't get rid of Tony Tucker either. So Lennox at this time is 27, 28 years old. This was his first world title fight. I'm just saying. Riddick Bowe was supposed to fight Lennox Lewis, but Riddick Bowe got rid of his WBC belt, so he didn't have to face his mandatory. Frank Bruno, you know, this is one of Bruno's best performances. It's decent performance by Lennox himself, but he wasn't using the jab enough. Bruno was out jabbing him. Bruno actually had him hurt and nearly finished, but that's actually when the fight turned around, and Lewis was able to get a good stoppage. But at the same time, this, if anyone had criticisms of Lewis, they would have came up about this time, because he was starting to display maybe some of his weaknesses, and it was maybe a matter of time. Now I'm saying this in hindsight, and that's why I'm using maybe and it could have been, because obviously I'm not part of the Lewis camp. So he done well to win against Bruno, but it had a bit of difficulty. And Bruno was also a former Tyson opponent, and good win still. Phil Jackson, I don't know if I've seen that fight, but yeah, knockout, technical knockout. First loss, Oliver Mccall. Now, there's Matthew Fouts on YouTube. He breaks down the theory of boxing, training, sparring. He dissects it very well, analyses the films, and Oliver Mccall set up a trap for Lennox Lewis to walk into a straight right hand. And Oliver Mccall was actually considered a fringe contender, but ultimately he got Lewis out of there rather quickly, and Lewis walked right into it. He hadn't recovered properly from the knockdown, and ultimately he was finished, and he ended up going towards Manuel Stewart and hiring Manuel Stewart to train him, because Manuel Stewart had obviously set up this excellent plan to knock out Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis kind of ran into the right hand and got hurt, and this is when people questioning his chin, as is often the first time with someone who's got a knockout defeat. Okay, we don't have to go too much into this. These two, Lionel Butler and Justin Fortune. Justin Fortune was about 5'8", tiny heavyweight, and Lewis was 6'5", so pretty easy. Lionel Butler, bit gun shy, he got there. Tommy Morrison. Now this fight was supposed to happen, 1994, and then both guys lost. Morrison lost to, is it Michael Bent, and then Lewis lost to Oliver Mccall, but he won that fight fairly easily, in my opinion, and Morrison had seen better days, but he's starting to get some, notoriety now. Mercer actually beat Morrison. And Mercer was known for his chin, relentless pressure, and very strong guy, hard puncher, and he was good solid heavyweight. And Larry Holmes is able to outbox him in 92, I believe, so we're getting into 96. And Ray Mercer really gave Lewis a tough fight. Lewis showed heart, and he showed an inside game that he didn't often show. Lewis had a good inside game, good uppercut, and he showed it in this fight. And he won a tight decision. But this started to turn the fans to say, right, this guy really has heart, and he maybe has a chin too. We knew Mercer had a chin, so that's a good win. Yes, Mercer had 3 defeats, but Mercer was a guy who couldn't really be slouched on. And this was a Mercer who still had good punch resistance. Okay, we're ready on the rematch with Oliver Mccall. From 96 to 03 was Lewis's best year from a legacy standpoint. He beat Oliver fairly well. Fought for the title that he lost. It was vacant. I believe Oliver won it, and then Frank Bruno won it, and then Mike Tyson beat Frank Bruno in a rematch, and then had he fought he'd fought Holyfield by this time. But Holyfield only in the WBA, didn't he? Well, yeah, because obviously he had the WBA, and then I think he had the IBF, then Holyfield did. So this belt is vacant. Don King does his magic, because ultimately it's Don King who got the WBC in the line. And Lewis was it wasn't Lewis's fault, but he had an unspectacular performance. Henry Akinwande got disqualified. I'm not really going to talk much about it. Henry Akinwande, he was showing signs of being scared. He held until he got disqualified. Galata again impressed me, because this was a guy who went life and death fights with Riddick Bowe twice. And he lost, but he lost due to his own, I don't want to say stupidity, but his own internal workings wasn't going right. So Lewis just went in there and bashed him up. 1 round knockout. Shannon Briggs. Briggs is a big puncher, bigger puncher than Oliver Mccall. Lewis was hurt, and Briggs is a fast starter, and he's known for his first round knockouts. But I don't think a lot of heavyweights would have been hurt by the punches the way Lewis was. And ultimately, Fifth round TKO. It was good, but Lewis showed vulnerability there. Sixth off Mccrory. Tough guy, good chin, good performance, but yeah, Lewis done what he had to do. Okay, we had the Holyfield draw, promotion by Don King for the 3 belts, which at the time was undisputed. Ultimately, who's the best of the 90s, Holyfield or Lewis? Mike Tyson was disqualified against Holyfield, so 2 back-to-back fights, wins the rematch, undisputed king, cements his legacy. Beats a contender Michael Grant, walks through him. Michael Grant, I think, knocked out, was it Jorge Luis Gonzalez? Beat another couple of guys, and Michael Grant was actually pretty good. Athletic, tall, could punch. But Lewis done some tricky inside, coming forward work as well, uppercuts. Showed that he had a bit of dog in him. He did just box all the time. And that bit of dog was good enough to knock him out, I think, in 2 rounds. Just excellent, if anyone hasn't seen that. Excellent. Franz Botha, pretty straightforward. David Tua, boring to be honest. Stayed away, box long, and we beat David Tua. Okay, another loss. Lewis just got complacent. And yeah, he got complacent, he got knocked out. I think in the 5th. Really shouldn't have lost to him or Mccall. But he said to Emmanuel Stewart, the coach, he said, rematch immediately. And that's how you know when a guy saying, get this rematch away immediately. That's when he knows he's confident enough to correct his mistakes in order to go and get his titles back. And lo and behold, wins by a spectacular knockout, just 2-punch combination, similar to the Mccall knockout of him. Right enough, RAHMAN wasn't coming in, but Lewis was able to whip the right hand, arc it more like a hook, set it up with the left, and that was all she wrote. Excellent. My favourite Lennox Lewis knockout is that one there. Mike Tyson, I didn't like the fight. It was like Mayweather Pacquiao. It was quite similar with the holding and that. I mean, you'd known that Lennox would have beat this version of Mike Tyson anyway. What I will say is, this wasn't a good Mike Tyson, and Lennox beat him. He just kind of leaned on him and stuff. Not great. VITALI KLITSCHKO, that was his last fight. Took the fight on a few weeks' notice, and I know he won and everything, but he was very lucky to win. But at the end of the day, he got the win, and he looked pretty good. He was really showing VITALI how it was done. And ultimately, I would like to see him fight Vladimir too, but he had had enough. I would like to have seen him fight Riddick Bowe and Michael Moore as well. Well, Michael Moore, he beat, like Lennox beat, but guys better than that. Not that like Michael Moore wasn't that great, but he was fine. But I'd like to see him fight Vladimir as well. But what can you do? That then cemented him as a real top 10 heavyweight, along with Jack Johnson and Rocky Marciano and all them guys. So 41 wins, 32 knockouts, 2 defeats, 1 draw.